She was alone, 8 months pregnant, on the floor of a highway gas station, losing consciousness under 94-degree heat, no one she knew within 40 miles. Then the door opened. 40 of them walked in, leather vests, tattooed arms, the kind of men most people cross the street to avoid. What happened next was caught on the security cameras. The footage was shared. And when people saw it, really saw it, they went quiet in the way you go quiet when something dismantles a belief you didn't know you were holding. This is the story of Sarah Callahan, Marcus Holt, and the afternoon that nobody in Cookeville, Tennessee forgot. The August heat in Cookeville had a particular cruelty to it, the kind that pressed down from the sky and radiated back up from the asphalt in shimmering waves that made the horizon look like it was melting. By 2 in the afternoon, the temperature had climbed to 94 degrees, and the parking lot of the Pilot Travel Center on Interstate 40 felt less like a rest stop and more like a slow-motion oven. Sarah Callahan had been driving for 4 hours. She had left Nashville at 10 in the morning before the worst of the heat set in, before the baby started pressing against her ribs in the particular way that made breathing feel like a negotiation. Her navy blue Civic had air conditioning that worked only when it felt like it, and today it had decided not to feel like it somewhere around Lebanon. She'd cracked the windows and told herself it was fine. She told herself a lot of things that weren't true these days. The exit ramp leading into the pilot station felt like a small mercy. Sarah pulled in slowly, her left hand resting on top of the steering wheel and her right hand pressed flat against the curve of her belly. 8 months and 2 weeks, and the baby, a girl she had decided to name Lily, had been restless since morning. The movement was reassuring in its way, even when it hurt. She parked near the entrance, not far from the pumps, and sat for a moment with the engine idling. Through the windshield, she could see the gas station proper, a wide, flat-roof building with a convenience store attached, 2 flags snapping in the dry summer air, and a row of industrial fans mounted above the entrance that moved the heat around without doing much to diminish it. She was halfway through the door when she saw them. The motorcycles had begun arriving while she was parking. She'd registered the sound at the edge of her awareness without processing it. Now she understood. There were dozens of them, a long procession of Harleys rolling in from the westbound lane with a sound like thunder that didn't quite stop. They pulled into the far end of the lot in a practiced formation, engines cutting off in sequence until the sudden quiet felt almost as loud as the noise had been. 40 men, give or take. Sarah counted instinctively, the way she'd always done in crowds. 40 men in black leather vests with a patch on the back, she recognized even from 30 yards away, the winged skull of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Most of them were large, weathered, tattooed in ways that mapped the geography of hard years. Several wore mirrored sunglasses, a few had bandanas knotted around their necks against the road dust. Sarah had grown up in Murfreesboro, which was close enough to real country that she'd heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. She pushed through the glass door of the convenience store and told herself not to stare. Inside, the air conditioning actually worked. She stood near the entrance for a moment and let the cold air settle on her skin, feeling her heartbeat slow slightly, feeling the tightness in her lower back ease a fraction. Donna Price, the woman behind the counter, mid-50s, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looked up and smiled the particular smile of someone who'd worked a highway rest stop long enough to have seen everything. "You doing all right, honey?" Donna asked. Her eyes dropped briefly to Sarah's belly with the involuntary concern of a woman who had likely raised children of her own. "Just the heat," Sarah said. "I need water. A lot of water." She moved toward the cooler at the back of the store. The cold air from the open refrigerator cases hit her face, and she stopped walking for a moment, just breathing it in. That was when the first wave hit. Not pain exactly, more like a sudden absence of equilibrium, as if the floor had tilted without warning. She put one hand on the cooler door and waited for it to pass. It didn't pass. The second wave was worse. Her vision contracted at the edges, darkening inward like a camera lens closing, and her legs sent a message to her brain that they were no longer confident about their responsibilities. She heard herself say something, she couldn't tell what. And then the floor came up to meet her. Outside, through the plate glass windows, a man named Marcus Holt had just kicked down the stand on his 2019 Road Glide Special and pulled off his helmet. He was 44 years old and had ridden more miles than he could accurately calculate, across 31 states, into Canada twice, through weather that should have stopped him, and didn't. He had grey in his beard now, and in the temples of his dark hair, and his hands were calloused from decades of handlebars, and before that, from the kind of work you did when you grew up with nothing and needed to build something from scratch. He was reaching into his saddlebag for his wallet when his son, Kevin, appeared at his elbow. "Dad." Kevin Holt was 19, still in that phase where everything came out with a little more urgency than situations usually warranted. But the look on his face now was different. He was pointing at the window. "Dad, someone just fell inside." Marcus looked up. Through the glass, he could see a woman on the floor near the back coolers, heavily pregnant, not moving. He was through the door before he'd consciously decided to move. Donna Price was already coming around the counter when Marcus pushed through the door. She was on her phone, voice controlled, but tight, telling the 911 dispatcher the address in the precise, competent way of someone who understood that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Marcus registered all of this in about half a second and kept moving. Sarah was on her side on the linoleum floor near the refrigerator cases. She had caught herself partially on the way down. Her right palm was scraped and she'd hit her shoulder, but her belly, crucially, had been protected. She was conscious, which was the first thing Marcus checked. Her eyes were open and tracking, and there was sweat on her forehead that had nothing to do with the heat outside. "Hey!" He crouched down beside her, close but not crowding. His voice, which could fill a room when he wanted it to, dropped to something deliberately calm. "I've got you. Don't try to get up." I got dizzy," Sarah said. Her voice was thin. "The baby is fine. I can feel her moving." "Good, that's good." He looked at her hands, her color, the way her breathing was coming. His ex-wife had been a labor and delivery nurse for 11 years, and some of what she'd told him over the years had settled into his memory in the practical way of things you absorbed without meaning to. "How far along are you?" 8 months. A little over. "Any pain?" "Different from regular." "No, just I haven't eaten since 6 this morning, and the car's AC is broken. Dehydration and low blood sugar, most likely." The heat had done the rest. Marcus glanced up at Donna, who had finished the call. "EMS is coming," Donna confirmed. 8 minutes. "Okay." He looked back at Sarah. 8 minutes. You're going to be fine. Just stay still for me." Sarah was looking at him in a way he was used to. The rapid recalibration you could watch happen behind someone's eyes when the image they'd built in the first 3 seconds met something that didn't match it. The vest, the patches, the tattoos crawling up his neck. He watched her take all of it in, and then, with the particular pragmatism of a woman who was 8 months pregnant on a hot floor and had just fainted, decide that none of it mattered right now. "Okay," she said. Kevin had come in behind him and was hanging back near the entrance, uncertain. Several more of the club members had followed, stopping in the doorway. Marcus turned and looked at them over his shoulder. Big Ray, who was the size of a refrigerator and had the gentlest voice in the group. Tommy Briggs, who was a retired electrician from Knoxville. Danny Watts, who had 3 daughters of his own. Men he had known for years. men who were looking at the woman on the floor with expressions he recognized as concern. "Ray," Marcus said, "can you get cold water from the cooler? Bottled, not from the fountain." "On it," Ray said. He moved with surprising care for his size, stepping around Sarah's legs to reach the refrigerator case. "Tommy, go find if there's a first aid kit behind the counter. Donna, is that all right?" "Already got it," Donna said, reappearing with a white kit. The next 7 minutes had a quality Marcus would think about later. The way a group of people, none of whom knew each other, could organize themselves around an emergency if the emergency was clear enough. 2 of the bikers moved vehicles to open up a path for the ambulance. Kevin found a folded emergency blanket in someone's saddlebag and brought it in so Marcus could roll it and put it under Sarah's head. Donna wet a cloth with cold water and pressed it to Sarah's forehead with the efficiency of someone who had raised 3 boys. Sarah drank water slowly. Her color began to improve. The baby moved, and she guided Marcus's hand to feel it without quite thinking about what she was doing. It was an instinct, the need to share the proof that everything was still all right. And for a moment he felt the small, insistent pressure through the stretched fabric of her shirt and didn't say anything. "First baby?" he asked after a moment. "Yes." A pause. "First everything, kind of. I'm doing this alone." He nodded, not in judgment, just acknowledgement. "Where are you headed?" "My mother's in Crossville." She tried to smile. "I was going to make it in one piece." "You still are," Marcus said. "You just needed a pit stop." Outside, through the plate glass, the other 35 members of the group had formed a loose perimeter around the entrance, not blocking it, not interfering, just present. Some of them were sitting on the curb in the shade of the building. A few were directing the handful of other customers who'd pulled in, quietly, without drama, making sure the space in front of the entrance stayed clear. One man, older, was sitting on a concrete barrier with his helmet in his lap, looking at nothing in particular, in the watchful way of someone who has appointed himself to keep an eye on things. Deputy Craig Weston arrived 90 seconds before the ambulance, coming in fast from the highway with his lights on, but no siren. He was 38, 12 years on the job, and he had been dispatched to this location enough times over the years. Fender benders in the parking lot, the occasional domestic dispute at the adjacent motel, that he had a working mental map of the place. What he did not have a working mental map for was 40 Hell's Angels, arranged in a protective semicircle around the entrance of the pilot station. He stepped out of the cruiser, with one hand loose at his side, cataloguing. Big Ray was the first person to speak to him. "Pregnant lady fainted inside," Ray said, in his quiet, deep voice. "EMS is almost here. Our president is with her. She's stable." Craig Weston looked at Ray for a long moment. Then he looked at the crowd. Then he said, "All right," and went inside. Craig Weston had a theory about the Hell's Angels, the way most people in law enforcement had a theory, built from training materials, incident reports, and the accumulated lore of the profession. Some of it was accurate. Some of it was the kind of generalization that happened when you dealt with a category of people primarily through the filter of their worst representatives. He was self-aware enough to know the theory existed, which put him one step ahead of a lot of people, though that didn't make the theory disappear. What he found inside the pilot station complicated things. The woman on the floor, he learned her name was Sarah Callahan from the ID Donna provided, was visibly better than she'd been 9 minutes ago, based on Donna's account. She was sitting up slightly, supported by the rolled emergency blanket. She was drinking water. There was color in her face. The man beside her, Marcus Holt, as Craig would learn, was crouched with his forearms resting on his knees, talking to her in a low voice. And the young man a few feet back was watching the door with the edgy attentiveness of someone who wanted to be useful and hadn't found the right angle yet. Deputy, Marcus said without standing up. He said it the way you address someone you had no quarrel with but weren't going to perform deference for either. Level. Factual. Sir. Craig looked at Sarah. Mum, how are you feeling? Better, she said. I think I was dehydrated, and I skipped breakfast. He nodded. EMS would assess. He looked at Marcus. You were first on scene? My son saw her go down through the window. We came in. Craig looked around the store. The water bottles, the first aid kit open on the floor. The systematic, competent way the scene had been managed. He was trying to reconcile this with something, and finding that the reconciliation was taking longer than usual. You're Marcus Holt, he said. It wasn't a question. The name patch on the vest was visible. Yeah. You're the chapter president. Yeah. Craig looked at him for another moment. Then he stepped back and let the paramedics in, because the ambulance had just pulled up outside. The two paramedics, a man named Joe and a woman named Alicia, moved in with practiced efficiency, checking Sarah's vitals, asking their questions in the quick, structured way of people who had done this thousands of times. Her blood pressure was low, but not alarmingly so. Her blood sugar, when they checked it, was 61. Low enough to explain the fainting, not low enough to indicate something more serious. The baby's heartbeat on the portable monitor was steady and strong. We're going to take you in for observation, Alicia told Sarah. Just to be thorough, given your stage, we want to make sure. Sarah nodded. Then she looked at Marcus. Thank you, she said. It came out simply, without the kind of elaborate framing people sometimes used when they needed to acknowledge something that surprised them. Just thank you, direct and complete. Drive safe, Marcus said. It wasn't until they were loading her onto the stretcher that Sarah, looking up at the ceiling of the Pilot Travel Center, said, My car is still in the lot, and my bag is in the back seat. My phone charger, I have everything I need in there. Her voice carried the particular strain of someone who had been keeping a lot of plates spinning and had just realized the plates were still spinning without her. We'll keep an eye on it, Donna said immediately. I can call someone in Crossville, Sarah said, mostly to herself. My mum, she can, but she doesn't drive on the highway. Marcus had already taken out his phone. What's your mother's name? He asked. Sarah blinked. Why? Because someone needs to let her know you're going to the hospital and that you're okay, and you should probably not be the one to make that call right now. You'll scare her worse. Sarah stared at him for a second. Behind her, Craig Weston, who was completing his incident report near the door, went very still in the way of someone who has registered something they didn't expect. Patricia Callahan, Sarah said. She's in Crossville. Her number is in my phone, which is in my car. Kevin, Marcus said. Kevin was already moving toward the door. Outside, the cluster of men who had been waiting on the curb and the concrete barriers had not dispersed. Some of them had gotten drinks from the vending machines along the side of the building. A few were talking in the low, comfortable way of men who had spent long hours together in transit. When Kevin came out and started looking for a navy blue Civic, two of them got up without being asked and helped him look. They found the car. They found the phone. It was on the passenger seat, unlocked. Kevin brought it to Marcus, who got Patricia Callahan's number and handed the phone to Donna because Donna had the voice for this, the voice of someone calm and maternal and entirely trustworthy. Donna dialed. Mrs. Callahan, my name is Donna Price. I'm calling from the pilot station on I-40 in Cookville. Your daughter is okay. She fainted earlier. We think it was the heat, and EMS is taking her in for a quick checkup, but she is okay. And the baby is okay. She asked me to call you. Sarah was on the stretcher now. She turned her head and found Marcus standing a few feet away. The ambulance doors were open behind him, Joe and Alicia waiting. You didn't have to do any of that, she said. I know, Marcus said. Why did you? He thought about it for a moment, the kind of moment where someone decides whether to give the easy answer or the real one. Because you needed help, he said. That's it. That's the whole thing. Craig Weston finished writing something in his notebook. He didn't look up, but the pen stopped moving. The Cumberland Medical Center in Crossville was 40 minutes from Cookville on a good day, and the paramedics made it in 35. Sarah was in observation by mid-afternoon, hooked to a fetal monitor that translated her daughter's heartbeat into a rolling green line on a screen, regular and reassuring as a metronome. Her mother, Patricia, arrived 40 minutes after that, white-haired and fierce and barely 5 feet tall, the kind of woman who had raised a daughter alone and come out of it with opinions about everything and the confidence to share them. She sat beside Sarah's bed and held her hand and didn't cry, because she was Patricia Callahan, and Patricia Callahan did not cry in hospitals. She saved that for the car. "You should have stopped sooner," Patricia said. "I know." "You should have eaten something." "I know, Mom. The air conditioning in that car has been broken since April." "I know." Patricia looked at her daughter for a moment, taking inventory the way mothers do. Then she said, "Tell me about the men." Sarah had told the story twice already, once to the paramedics and once to the admitting nurse, both times in the abbreviated logistical way you told stories to medical professionals. This was different. This was her mother. They came in," Sarah said. "The leader, Marcus, he was just there. He knew what to do. He kept me calm. They organized everything. One of them, a big guy, Ray, he got the water. They cleared the parking lot for the ambulance. His son called my phone to get your number." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Hell's Angels," she said, "the way you said the name of something you had a pre-formed picture of." "That's what the patch said." Another silence. "And they just helped." "Yes. Without being asked." "Without being asked." Patricia looked down at their joined hands. "Huh," she said. It contained a lot. Back at the Pilot Travel Center in Cookville, the convoy had not yet left. This was unusual. They had a destination, a rally in Knoxville that evening, and Marcus was not a man who fell behind schedule without a reason. But Kevin had pointed out, sensibly, that Sarah's car was still in the lot, and that when she was discharged she would need a way to get to Crossville, and that none of them knew whether anyone had thought that far ahead. Marcus had called the hospital. He'd gotten the number from Donna and spoken to a nurse who confirmed after some back and forth that the patient was doing well and would likely be released in 2 to 3 hours. He had relayed this to the group. Nobody had suggested leaving. Craig Weston, who should have been back on patrol 40 minutes ago, was sitting in his cruiser in the lot with the window down, filling out paperwork at a pace that did not match his usual efficiency. He had run Marcus Holt's name through the system. This was routine. What came back was the kind of file that confirmed everything the theory predicted. 2 prior arrests in the 90s, 1 conviction for aggravated assault that had resulted in 18 months and 2 years of probation, a list of known associates that read like a law enforcement briefing document. The theory, looking at the printout, felt validated. He thought about the rolled-up emergency blanket under Sarah's head. He thought about the way Marcus had spoken to her, not performing gentleness, just being it. He thought about Kevin, 19 years old, moving through the parking lot to find a cell phone because someone needed help. He thought about Big Ray, who had gotten water with the kind of care you didn't perform. You either had or you didn't. The theory and the afternoon weren't fitting together neatly, and Craig Weston was honest enough with himself to feel the friction of that. He got out of the cruiser. Marcus was leaning against the side of the building in the shade, drinking a bottle of water, when Craig walked over. 2 of the other men were nearby, Tommy Briggs and an older man named Sid, but they drifted back when they saw the deputy coming, giving space without being asked. "Hell of an afternoon," Craig said. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. A beat. The industrial fans above the entrance hummed. Out on the interstate, trucks moved in the relentless rhythm of commerce. "You could have just called it in and waited outside," Craig said. "Nobody would have blamed you." Marcus looked at him steadily. "I don't make decisions based on what nobody would blame me for," he said. "I saw a woman who needed help. So did my son. So did 40 other people I ride with." He paused. "I understand what you're thinking. I've been on the receiving end of what you're thinking my whole adult life." Craig didn't deny what he was thinking. "The file's what it is," he said. "The file's 20 years old," Marcus said. "I was 24. I made the choices I made, and I paid for them." Something in his voice wasn't defensive. It was the opposite, the tone of a man who had sat with the full weight of his history and come to terms with it. "I'm not that man anymore. The problem is nobody's made a file for who I am now." Craig was quiet for a moment. "Who are you now?" Marcus looked out at the parking lot, at the men on the curb, at the motorcycles lined up in their orderly rows, at Kevin, who was sitting on a concrete barrier talking to Tommy with the openness of youth, still learning how to be in the world. "A father," he said, "a man who keeps his word, someone who shows up." Craig looked at the parking lot too. "Those are also the things she said about you," he said eventually. "The woman, Sarah, when I took her statement." Marcus said nothing. But something shifted slightly in the set of his shoulders, not softening exactly, more like a weight being recognized rather than set down. "I'm going to finish my paperwork," Craig said. "You all need anything while you wait?" "We're fine," Marcus said. "Thank you." Craig nodded. He walked back to his cruiser. Before he got in, he paused with his hand on the door and looked back at the group, the vests, the bikes, the sun-worn faces, the men who had come from somewhere else and would go somewhere else and had stopped here in the middle of a hot Tennessee afternoon and done something that the file didn't have a column for. He finished his paperwork and clocked out late without filing a reason for the delay. Sarah was discharged at 5:40 in the afternoon. Her blood pressure had normalized, her blood sugar was stable, and Lily, whose heartbeat had remained steady and strong through the entire afternoon, had settled into the quieter movements of a baby who was, as the obstetrician on call put it, completely unbothered. Patricia drove her to the parking lot of the Pilot Travel Center in the Crossville Hospital's patient discharge loop, which involved some logistical complexity that Patricia navigated with characteristic efficiency. By the time they arrived, the sun had moved lower in the sky, and the worst of the heat had broken, not gone, but softened, the air carrying the faint suggestion of evening coming. Sarah had not expected them to still be there. But the motorcycles were in the lot, and the men were there, some of them standing, some sitting, the same loose, patient grouping they'd formed hours ago. When she got out of her mother's car, a few of them looked up. Marcus was near the building, talking to Kevin and 2 other men. He saw her and crossed the lot with the unhurried stride of someone who was not performing urgency, but was still moving with purpose. "How is she?" he asked. He meant Lily. "Perfect," Sarah said. "They said everything is perfect." And her voice did something she hadn't intended at the word perfect, cracked slightly at the edges, the way voices did when you'd been holding it together for hours and then found yourself, unexpectedly, safe. "I can't believe you're still here." "Your car needed to stay with someone," Marcus said simply. "You waited 4 hours." "We weren't in a hurry," he said. Which wasn't entirely true. They'd missed the early part of the rally by now, and Marcus knew it, and he'd made the call anyway. He didn't volunteer this. Patricia Callahan, who was standing slightly behind her daughter, looked at Marcus Holt with the evaluating directness of a woman who had spent 6 decades reading people. He met her gaze without flinching, without softening it, which she registered as the right instinct. "Thank you," Patricia said. The 2 words carried considerable weight, coming from her, and Marcus seemed to understand this. "I'm glad she's okay," he said. Then, to Sarah, "Can I see something?" He led her around to the driver's side of her Civic. Kevin appeared with a small cooler, the portable kind, soft-sided, that some of the riders kept strapped to their bikes for long hauls. He handed it to Marcus. "We put together some food," Marcus said. "For the rest of the drive. Water, sandwiches, some fruit, nothing fancy." Sarah looked at the cooler, then at Marcus, then at the group of men spread across the parking lot, 40 people who had altered the afternoon, not because it was convenient or expected, or anyone would have noticed if they hadn't, who had stayed for hours for a woman they didn't know because her car was in the lot and someone needed to keep watch over it. She thought about the image she'd had when she first saw them rolling in, the automatic, involuntary tightening, the way the mind reached for the story it already knew. She thought about Marcus's voice on the floor of the travel center. "I've got you. Don't try to get up." She thought about the emergency blanket folded from someone's saddlebag. She thought about Donna's voice on the phone, telling her mother she was okay, and how that had been orchestrated by a man with a criminal record 20 years old and a file that said nothing about who he was at 44. She thought, the story we carry about people is so rarely the story they're actually living. "I don't know what to say," she told Marcus. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "Why did you stay, really? The whole 4 hours?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Kevin, who was standing nearby, and Kevin looked back at him with the open-faced attention of someone still learning the things his father was trying to teach him. And Marcus understood, in that moment, that this was part of the teaching, that the most important lessons were not the ones you delivered with words, but the ones you lived in front of your children, in parking lots and hospital waiting rooms and ordinary August afternoons that turned out to be something more. "Because Kevin saw you fall," Marcus said, "and I want him to understand that when you see someone fall, you don't walk past. You don't wait for it to be someone else's problem. You go in." He paused. "And I want him to see that the people who need help don't always look the way you expect, and neither do the people who give it." Sarah nodded. Her eyes were full, but she didn't cry, which Marcus respected. "I'm going to name her Lily Margaret," she said. "Margaret was my grandmother's name." A pause. "I've been going back and forth on it, but I decided today." She held out her hand. Marcus shook it, a real handshake, firm and equal. Then Patricia Callahan stepped forward and shook his hand too, which surprised him slightly, and he found he didn't want to analyze why it affected him. The convoy left 20 minutes later, engines turning over in sequence. A sound Sarah would find comforting for the rest of her life every time she heard it in the distance. She stood in the parking lot with her mother and watched them go, a long procession of black leather and chrome, moving back onto the interstate and heading east toward Knoxville in the late afternoon light, growing smaller until the highway curved and they were gone. Donna Price stood in the doorway of the travel center with a cloth in her hand, watching too. "Huh," Donna said, which was exactly what Patricia had said in the hospital and contained the same amount. Sarah drove the rest of the way to Crossville, with the air conditioning still broken and the windows down, and the heat didn't bother her. The cooler was on the passenger seat. She ate a sandwich at a rest stop outside of Monterey, listening to the trucks on the highway and the sound of August insects and the steady, reliable movement of Lily inside her. She thought about the story she would tell her daughter one day, when Lily was old enough to understand that the world was more complicated and more merciful than it often appeared, that human beings were capable of organizing themselves around each other's emergencies in ways that defied the categories they'd been filed into. She thought about Marcus Holt, who carried a past that preceded him into every room and had decided somewhere along the way to carry something else alongside it. She thought about Kevin, 19 years old, learning to see. She arrived in Crossville as the sun was setting, the sky over the Cumberland Plateau turning the particular deep orange that you only got in Tennessee in summer, and her mother was waiting on the porch with the porch light on, and the house smelled like the chicken soup Patricia made whenever someone needed to be taken care of. Sarah got out of the car slowly, one hand on the door, one hand on her belly. "Come on," Patricia said from the porch. "Come inside." She went inside.